Hey, how are we doing, Christ United? This is Rocky Shack. I'm one of your pastors here at Christ United, and we are so glad to have wrapped up the first week of our new sermon series called Together, where we will be spending the entire summer just going through 1 Corinthians, this letter that Paul writes to a church that he knows very well. He was a missionary. He goes to Corinth, and he notices that it is a huge economic center, this major port city. So it brings all these different people from all different backgrounds, religions. I mean, they have all these Greek and Roman temples all over the place. And he goes to that place and he shares the gospel. He shares this good news that God has given to him. And he talks about how he went from being the one who was persecuting Christians and moving to being persecuted for the sake of the gospel. And of course, like, everybody hears this message and everybody starts becoming a Christian, and all these followers, and they create this Christian community right there in Corinth. And he leaves and goes and he starts churches in other big cities in that area. But he starts hearing all these reports of how poorly this church is doing several years later. And that is why he's writing the letter. He's writing this letter because he hears all these problems. And one of these problems is divisions. They have split off into all these different factions. They are warring against each other. And now that neighbor love that they're supposed to be sharing, love God, love your neighbor, they're no longer doing that. That's been hijacked. And so for Paul, he's trying to get the church back on track. He's saying, stop focusing so much on dividing and get your focus back on what Jesus asked us to do. And he asked us, multiply, make more disciples, make disciples in all of the world. So what Paul is saying is that he's tired of hearing people saying, I belong to Paul, or I belong to Apollos, or Cephas, or I belong to Christ. But what he's saying is that these divisions don't do the gospel any good, because if anything, it hurts our credibility. And we need our credibility for a world that is constantly watching how we treat one another. So I hope what you heard on Sunday through the sermon is that, man, you have a good news. This good news, this gospel, this is the thing that binds us together. Not all this human stuff that we keep coming up with to divide ourselves. Instead, let's focus on the thing that binds us together. The fact that we believe in one God, Father, Son, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit. The fact that we believe that God sent his son, Jesus Christ, into a world to die on a cross because he is crucified, dead, and buried. And the good news of it all, that we believe that by the power of the Holy Spirit, the same Holy Spirit that is the power that is within each one of us, that same power is the same power that raised Jesus from the dead. That is the good news. That is the thing that binds us together. That is what is essential in this world. So my question for you, and we have questions leading up to the sermon, and we have questions after the sermon to be able to kind of spark some discussion, or kind of get you thinking about the sermon, or thinking about and going deeper in the sermon. But what I want you to think about this week is, what is the good news that Jesus has freely given me? What is the good news that I have to give? Because that is what God has called us to. Preach the good news to everybody that we can. So, church family, stay tuned. We have week 2 coming up, and Eddie will take it from there.